This group of friends have a more advanced space program than North Korea. It's amazing what can be accomplished with enough ingenuity. Phoenix 4. In September of 2015, Kurt Von Delius announced the successful launch of the Phoenix 4, a homemade rocket that, on this occasion, had a near-flawless takeoff and reached an altitude of just over 18 miles. This was the result of a 3-year project, which used the basic design of a Black Brant 8-sounding rocket, which was improved upon by using lightweight materials, modular components, and a newly developed interstage that creates a rigid stack that reduces the amount of friction it's subjected to. As it launched, the rocket lifted off from the 20-foot tower at 97 miles per hour, pulling 20 Gs in the process. It accelerated to Mach 1.31 and took a surprisingly straight flight and gentle apogee. After it reached its top height, it fell back to Earth under a parachute and landed just 2 miles away from where it had started, which was so close that the team were able to see it land before driving in to recover it. The project proved to be such a success that the team are now working on their next iteration, and they hope that this time they'll be able to actually reach space. Number 9. JR-101. Cape Rocketry is a collective of rocket enthusiasts from South Africa, and they've been leading the way in the country for amateur launches. Their intent is to develop new technologies for spaceflight by using only parts that have been made in South Africa, and in August of 2019 they completed their first successful launch. The rocket, known as JR-101, was powered by a custom-built ammonium nitrate motor, which uses a slightly different fuel to most amateur launches in order to produce less harmful gases. It was fitted with a GPS system so its altitude could be tracked, so the parachutes could be automatically released, and so the rocket could be retrieved once it landed again. It weighed 20 kilograms on the launch site and burnt more than a kilogram worth of propellant within the first second of launch. With temperatures reaching more than 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit in the engine, it had reached twice the speed of sound within 7 seconds, and after 45 seconds, had reached an altitude of 6.5 miles. As a first attempt, this is incredibly impressive, and the team plan on returning with the aim of doubling this height, and then in a few years hope to make the first launch to space from South Africa. Icarus. The 16-foot-tall Icarus rocket was designed and built by a team of students from the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Lakenheath, England, and in 2007 broke a world record for a university-built vehicle. With a 15-pound scientific package on board, which included accelerometers, spin sensors, and pressure sensors, it was also fitted with a GPS system so the team knew where it was at all times. They were given permission to use Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia to launch from, and after 4 years of planning, the rocket was ready to test in 2007. It accelerated to several times the speed of sound in a matter of seconds and managed to reach an altitude of 40 miles, which is 2/3 the distance to the edge of space. Since their success with this launch, several members of the team have now gone on to even the carbon nozzle was specifically designed to channel as much thrust downwards as possible. The result was a 13-foot tall and 8-inch wide rocket that weighed just 310 pounds and had a maximum thrust of 4,600 pounds of force, thanks to the R-Class motor and a blend of 6 different types of propellant. Launching from Spaceport America, it reached an altitude close to 340,000 feet, which is by far the highest ever achieved by a student organization, and it safely returned back to Earth. When they recovered the rocket just a few miles from the launch pad, all of the paint had burned off in the atmosphere, and even the fins were singed a little. Analysis of the video after the launch showed a slight oscillation in its flight shortly after launch, and the team hopes that by working out what caused this and eliminating it, the rocket could potentially go even further. Number 5. Heat-1X, Tycho Brahe. Copenhagen Suborbitals is an organization that was formed in 2008 with the aim to be the first to launch a human to suborbital flight by an amateur rocket. There are, of course, a number of steps they need to go through before they have a design that's safe enough for a person to set foot on, and their first design to be tested was the Heat-1X Tycho Brahe. This was planned to be a proof of concept which would be remote controlled, and from the learning from this launch they'd be able to move on to further designs that would eventually be able to incorporate a human pilot. Instead of using a nitrous oxide fuel like the one used by Virgin Galactic rockets, this model used liquid oxygen. It was built from mainly construction steel, and the booster was designed so it could be remotely shut off, with the whole thing costing around $50,000. The first launch was planned for 2010, but due to a last-minute malfunction, this had to be canceled and was rescheduled for 2011. On June 3rd, it was launched from a sea platform, and despite suffering from another malfunction, it still successfully lifted off. It soon reached supersonic speed and got to an altitude of 1.7 miles, but by this time the trajectory was so far off course that Mission Control was forced to shut off the engine after just 21 seconds. Had this not have happened, it would have probably reached much higher and provided ample data for the organization to begin planning for their next test. Number 4. The DART project. One of the most important aspects to the design of the rocket is the fuel that it uses. And while there are plenty of established propellants, engineers are constantly trying to develop cheaper and safer alternatives. The DART project was tasked with the challenge of reaching an altitude in excess of 50,000 feet, fueled solely by a sugar-based propellant. This required the design of a new 110mm diameter O9600 sugar rocket motor. But once this was done, the construction of the rest of the rocket was a relatively simple process. The DART itself was just under 50 millimeters in diameter, weighed 20.5 pounds, and was mounted on a fiberglass body tube. Altimeters and a GPS system were fitted on board and were powered by lithium-ion batteries, and the entire thing was ready to launch in late 2015. The main booster burned out within 3.5 seconds at an altitude of 4,000 feet, at which point the DART separated from the body tube and continued for a further 50 seconds to a height of 57,359 feet. Once it reached its apogee, an 18-inch parachute was deployed, which brought it safely back down to the ground, where it landed within a half mile of the launch site. Apart from a couple of complications, the launch was a complete success, and the next plan is to build a 2-stage rocket that also uses sugar-based fuel. And simulations suggest that this design has the potential to reach at least 100,000 feet, proving that there's far more to learn about the potential of different types of rocket fuel and their applications in space exploration. Number 3. HEROS 3. HEROS 3 was a rocket launched from the Esrange Space Center in Sweden in 2016, and at the time set the world record for the highest altitude reached by a rocket that had been built by a student organization. The 24-foot-tall vehicle was a hybrid-sounding rocket that used nitrous oxide and a paraffin-based fuel as its propellant, and this was calibrated to generate up to 10,000 newtons of thrust. Amazingly, the fully loaded rocket weighed just 165 pounds, thanks in part due to the use of carbon fiber in its construction, and this ensured that the majority of thrust could be used for vertical lift. On November 8, 2016, the weather conditions at the Space Center were perfect for a launch, and the rocket lifted off and reached a maximum velocity of Mach 2.3, which is the equivalent of 2,360 feet per second. This propelled the rocket to a height of 106,000 feet, which smashed the European record for amateur rocketry. Analysis following the test showed that the rocket remained remarkably stable throughout its flight, and that the fuel efficiency was actually better than had been expected. After it reached its apogee, the rocket was brought back down to the ground by 2 parachutes, and suffered so little damage that it would have been possible to relaunch it straight away. Number 2. Model Mercury Redstone. The greatest and most successful rockets to have ever launched were built with the financial and scientific support of the American and Russian governments. And despite some designs being many decades old, they're still inspiring amateur rocketry enthusiasts around the world. In 2018, the Maryland-Delaware Rocket Association earned their place in the record books after building the world's largest-scale model rocket, which was based on the 1961 Mercury Redstone rocket that was responsible for taking the first astronaut to the moon. Their version was 64.75 feet tall in comparison to the 83.38 feet of the original, and it weighed 700 pounds, which was about 100th of the mass of NASA's version. The main difference in weight, of course, was the volume of fuel that was used, and this replica version was only designed to go a short distance before returning to Earth. On its first flight, it reached a maximum height of a half-mile before parachuting back down to the ground, which was further than any replica rocket has ever traveled before. The main purpose of the project was to encourage creativity and design at a new workspace that had opened in Delaware. But after the success of this rocket launch, the team behind it are planning to go bigger and better with a larger and more powerful replica that'll go much higher. Number 1. Liberty 1. Of all the people in the world who design amateur rockets, Mad Mike Hughes definitely became the most renowned in recent years. He was an ardent flat Earth believer who had such a lack of trust in imagery taken from rockets and aircraft that he believed the only way he could prove the world was flat was by building his own rocket and collecting the evidence himself. Despite what you may have think of his motives, this led him on a mission that saw him develop some of the most impressive amateur rocket designs ever to be built. And on March 24, 2018, his dream became a reality. On March 24th, his steam-powered rocket, Liberty 1, launched from a site near Amboy in California and reached an altitude of 1,875 feet. It wasn't as smooth a launch as he would have liked, and after plummeting back to Earth at speeds of up to 350 miles per hour, his parachute wasn't able to slow the vehicle enough to prevent it from becoming severely damaged and causing injuries to himself in the process. This launch, of course, didn't reach anywhere near the height he would need to get in order to prove that the Earth was flat, and was intended just as the first in a series of launches that would eventually work up to a design that could take him to an altitude of around 68 miles. Unfortunately, he'll never be able to accomplish his dream, however, because in February of 2020, he attempted another launch and was killed when his rocket crashed. In the aftermath of the event, his publicist announced that Hughes had never believed in the flat Earth theory and was just using it to gain media attention, and that his true wish was to advance the field of amateur rocketry and to inspire new generations to develop an interest in spacecraft design.